I'm the Angry Spork. Marvel stunned readers a couple of years back when they actually killed off everyone's favorite X-Man, Wolverine. Well, stunned might be exaggerating it a bit. When it comes to comics, death is kind of like a case of the sniffles. It happens to just about everyone, and it doesn't last too long. And it didn't last long for him either. Longer than I would have thought. Though, this was not the first time Wolverine bit the dust. I'm taking issue with the first death of Wolverine, starting with the 3-part series, Astonishing X-Men. Let's start with issue number 1 and see if this comic makes us want to turn the page, or turn our heads. Story and art by Howard Mackey, Brandon Peterson, Tim Townsend, and Dan Panosian, with colors by Liquid. The cover sees a different, smaller roster.
The studio couldn't afford another X-Men.
From the ashes of the shattering. I kind of wonder if Phoenix takes any offense to the use of the word ashes. Anyway, we begin in a top-secret containment complex in New Mexico, designed to imprison just one guy, the cyborg Bastion. Before this, he was carrying out plans to exterminate all mutants, but now he's getting analyzed by the very scientist who used to call him boss, who also apparently shop at the same off-brand sunglass hut as Scott Summers. Bastion senses an intruder. Narration doesn't say how, but since he's part Sentinel, it could be assumed that he detects mutancy. But it has to be assumed. This one intruder in particular is making him extra fearful, demanding to be released or none of them will survive. Guards in really weird armored suits get taken down one by one, until we get a splash page of their assailant. He is death. He will not be stopped this night, until he has that which he seeks. Did anyone call for an Uber? Come on, guys, I've already demolished 2 other secret government bases tonight. I really need this fare. And is it just me, or does that skull belt buckle look like it has pupils? Like it's just trying to ignore everything going on and it's kind of embarrassed? Anyway, we get a page that introduces us to Warren Worthington III, Archangel, Cable, also known as Nathan Summers, who's just really looking at that spear, I don't know, and half a rolled away Nate Gray, potentially the greatest psionic power on Earth. You can tell he's young and hip because he's snowboarding. What force could possibly unite 3 such different men? Well, considering Nate is just a teenage version of Cable from the Age of Apocalypse reality, I wouldn't say they're too different. Jean Grey, also known as Phoenix, calls to each of them, saying that Professor Xavier has disbanded the X-Men, leaving only herself, Cyclops, and Wolvie. A little girl named Nina, one of a group of children called Manites, sent out a telepathic SOS and had no one else to turn to. A short time later, the 3 remaining X-Men wait next to the Blackbird, outside the Xavier school, when the rest of the party arrives, with Cable getting the drop on Logan. Old Knucklehead just attributes it to the shakeup of the prof ending the team. I think he's just preoccupied with all the stuff he still has on the DVR and wondering if Xavier's just going to delete it all by the time he gets back home. Wolvie is on so many teams at the same time, he has so much Downton Abbey to catch up on. Scott explains that the Manites are largely a mystery to them, possibly the result of government experimentation, but they do know that Nina in particular is extraordinarily powerful. She and her friends are being pursued by someone, and they have their coordinates logged into the plane's navigator ready to go. Cable seems pensive, as if the situation is more dangerous than it seems, but he can't really put a cybernetic finger as to why. After an hour, Cyclops is double-checking that they have the right place, because their coordinates have brought them to the Hulkbuster base. It was not only the home of Bastion's Operation Zero Tolerance before it became his prison, it was also where Scott and Jean were imprisoned, so he's not too happy to revisit it. They land to inspect the base, Jean noting that there aren't even traces of the minds of those who were previously here. And since they don't seem to see any bodies, I guess death just threw them somewhere? Wolvie says he'll take point while Warren scouts from above, with Cyclops' permission. Wolverine asking Cyclops for permission instead of just doing his own thing anyway? I'm gonna have to double check to make sure this isn't a what-if story. Cable asks Logan why he stuck around after the X split, and he explains that he just has no other family besides the team and didn't want to abandon Psyche and Jean when things looked bad. But enough of all that, it's on with the investigation. Jean is questioning bringing Nate into their world, but Scott thinks that at least now he has a chance of being a part of something bigger than himself, aside from the fact that they might need his immense power. He might be powerful, but it's hard to take him seriously with that face. Yeesh. I can't tell if he's trying to do a mocking impression of Wolvie or if half his face just suddenly fell asleep. Warren confirms there's no one else around, just as Jean detects faint brainwave activity, so Scott cuts loose with his optic blasts to clear the heavy debris blocking the entrance. Just as an evil presence is felt, the floor and walls begin moving, according to Cable, as if manipulated on a molecular level. They're being psionically controlled, Cable.
You think he would have caught on to that? Since he's psionic himself, and supposedly none too shabby at it either? I guess everyone's off their game today.
Wolverine finds the culprit, a kid that looks like if you spliced Beast Boy's DNA with that of the Hulk villain The Leader, and warns him to put down his gun. And X-Man is just leading back, taking it all in. Way to contribute to the team, Nate. Nina rushes in and tells the kid, Headcase, that the X-Men are there to help, and she takes them to see the rest of the Manites. Though they'd previously escaped from the base, they returned because the world overwhelmed them and they wanted more familiar surroundings, hidden from everyone else above. Another presence is sensed down a corridor, but Nina warns them not to go. There's a bad man down there. Jean, sensing fear and pain, won't let harm come to the children, but they have to see if someone needs help. A couple minutes later, they find Bastion. Well, what's left of him. And he's either being sustained or only suspended by wires, I can't tell, which is extra surprising since the X-Men were told he was destroyed. Noticing a couple of the kids, the Man-Borg gets all cryptic about how much more powerful than mutants the Manites are, how they'll inherit the Earth as the next stage of evolution, and how Bastion saved them when they were written off as failures. His talk is upsetting the little girl, so it's decided they'll look for her friends and grab Bastion on their way out.
Now there's some wacky thinking for you. Bastion hates mutants so much he wants them all eradicated. But these kids that dwarf the power of mutants, he wants to keep around? I guess you could say he thought he could control them, mold them into adults that follow his orders and his ideals, but it still seems rather head-scratching to me.
Logan figures he can fulfill Nina's request of making the bad man stop talking, preeminent-like, but Psyche stops him with the old "we aren't as bad as our enemy" spiel. Nina senses someone else closing in and insists they find the others fast, so they leave Bastion to be cryptic again, but with more self-preservation and panic. Before long, they reach a solid titanium door that Nina opens a portal through, to the rest of the Manites. Just in time, because the one that's after them manages to dent that door. You know, the one made of titanium. Weird how Scott says he's slicing through it, when it's clearly a concussive impact, not lacerate. X-Man added some telekinetic reinforcement so Jean and the others can get the kids to safety, while Cyclops and Cable go back for Bastion. Fortunately, one Manite has the ability to project a schematic telling them exactly where to go.
That's right. Each of these kids has multiple superpowers convenient for any given situation. Coming this fall to the CW, it's Plot Convenience Kids.
Their pursuer somehow hits the door with enough force to knock Nate out. At least, that's what Jean says. And one of the kids, Grace, activates the base's self-destruct, and she can't deactivate it, even though there could be others trapped in the compound. Jean seems to be eyeing the reader like, what, are you blaming us, or are you expecting us to do something? Anyway, she informs her husband of the elevated threat, and he still wants to go get Bastion, only to find he's gone.
Dang it! That was the last evil cyborg head they had in stock. I knew I should have pre-ordered on Amazon.
Nate's back on his feet, saying he can't hold up his barrier much longer, and it's kind of weird because when Jean said Nate was down, it made it seem like he was unconscious or something. The panels can get so small and cluttered, it's hard to get a sense of what's going on beyond what they seem to have to describe in dialogue. Anyway, Phoenix has Nina open up a portal to the outside while Scott and Cable blast their way to an emergency tunnel, with the latter TKing their way up. Some blasted how, Nina and the X-Men make it through the portal to the Blackbird, but the other Manites wound up somewhere else after going through the same portal.
Maybe Nina's portals work like the interstate, and the Manite kids just took the first off-ramp they saw had a McDonald's.
There aren't any more people left in the facility, so there's no ethical quandary in the mutants boarding their plane and hauling out as the Hulkbuster base gets busted. And out from the rubble rises Death, holding Bastion's head in such a way that begs for a Hamlet reference.
But I won't make that reference, because this story should have more self-respect than to beg.
You don't actually know anything about Hamlet, do you, brah?
Shut up.
Issue number 2, with a cover that features the new Horseman attacking the X-Man that once had his job.
Death meet death. Death meet death. I'm sure you both have a lot to talk about.
As narration recaps the previous events, the Blackbird gets caught in the explosion's resultant electromagnetic pulse, killing the nav computer and stalling the controls. Wolvie can land it, but only with the 3 telekinetics on board holding it in one piece. Then there's this weird panel. Nina hasn't said anything, but Wolverine tells her to calm down, only for the girl to interrupt him saying, "Death is here!" It's just awkward without some kind of exclamation of terror from her for Logan to respond to. Oh, and Death is there, somehow ahead of them and firing a pillar of energy? It's Death! He's a bad man!
All he did was kill a bunch of people and destroy an entire military base. Being a little judgmental, aren't we?
They manage a landing they can walk away from, and Psyche starts giving out orders, setting up recon and defenses in anticipation of their foe. Jean, meanwhile... Jean-while? She mind links with Nina to get a better understanding of the Manites, and... I guess inside her head Nina looks like a pink phalanx. They connect with the other kids, but they're afraid that the X-Men will fear them once they find out who their parents are and what they'll become. The link is severed when Nina mentions a changing, and says that they have to find the others now. I guess Death took a coffee break or 4, because Jean has time for exposition. As suspected, the Manites were laboratory created, and Death wants them, well, dead. So, with the plane kaput at the moment, the team needs to split. Jean, Wolvie, and Nate go with Nina to find her siblings, while Cable and Warren stay behind with Psyche, who's always got his rapport with Jean to stay in touch in an emergency. Then, GAH!
Ah, the art style changed so drastically it gave my eyes whiplash. If I didn't have these shades, I'd probably be blinded right now.
Team Find Them Youngins arrives at a strangely quiet carnival, finding some of the rides covered in a strange material that's breaking down plastics and metal. Oh, and some people are trapped in it too, and they could be next. Nina says this is part of the changing, a metamorphic phase in the Manites that is different for each of them. X-Man begins thinking their pursuit of the kids is just like his life from his own timeline, thinking the Manites should make their own choices. Jean clarifies that they're not hunting the kids, but trying to help them so they can learn to control their powers. But Nate still doesn't see the difference.
Nate Gray is a moron.
This particular changing is being experienced by Darko, and with the chaos it's causing, Wolvie and Gray are on board with taking the rest of the kids and hightailing it. But Jean can see the pain Darko is going through and won't leave him, despite the danger. His experience is not unlike what mutants go through when their powers first surface. We pop over to Archangel Cyclops and his future son, musing on how little they know about their opponent when they stumble upon Bastion, who becomes slightly less cryptic than before, saying they haven't been tracking Death, he's been baiting them!
Wait, is Death an internet troll? Man, that's not intimidating at all. Though it does kind of make sense that he's menacing small children, trying to pick fights he thinks he can win.
Somehow, in his short time with the Horsemen, Bastion's been illuminated on how supremely prepared he is for each of the X-Men. Just as Cable links Scott's mind with Warren, Rich Boy is surprised by their enemy. Talk about death from above. At the carnival, Wolverine notes his admiration for Jean's compassion, but since his is significantly more limited, he's seriously considering putting Darko down his way to save the innocents. So Phoenix asks for access to the other Manites' minds, so she can learn more about them and the changing. Darko's powers involve absorbing inorganic and organic matter to convert to energy, but now it's requiring more than normal, with the tendrils acting as defense. Probing deeper into the kids' origins, Jean reaches an epiphany just before being grabbed. Even as X-Man saves her, he seems to need to describe the fact that the tendrils are absorbing her more quickly and he needs to act fast. And then she's freed a couple panels later. Exposition is doing a lot of legwork in this story. Wolvie reasserts his intention to attack the Source, but a newly freed Jean calls him off, knowing what to do. But first, back to the desert, where Death apparently disappeared before their eyes. I guess while Logan was threatening to kill a child. They reason that the cloaked figure was using some kind of cloaking device, one strong enough to elude Cable's psi probes. And that's when Warren falls from the sky.
Now wait, let's not jump to conclusions here. He normally flies like a bird, right? Well, maybe all of a sudden he decided he wanted to know what it was like to fly like a rock. You know, rich people, they always have these weird idiosyncrasies.
He mutters that Death was toying with him, and that he wants something from the X-Men as well as the Manites. Cable notices Scott raising his visor and asks why, because apparently he too is a moron. And I guess they thought that this was really dramatic, even though we can see who he's shooting at on the same page. Making matters worse, Death blocks it with his sword, which should be kind of impossible, what with Summers being powerful enough to destroy mountains if he wanted to, and it doesn't look like this guy was so much as nudged. Physics alone... Moving on. Jean's discovered that the Manites share mental and physical bonds. Their minds are as different from ours as we are from the dolphins.
So when Manites take their place as leaders of the New World Order, does that mean mutants will be kept in water parks and made to perform tricks for tiny fish?
With Logan on physical defense and Nate on telepathic defense, Jean focuses solely on Darko, while aided by Nina. Phoenix tells the boy not to be afraid of what's happening. The changing is natural, and his fear is making it more painful than it needs to be. It calms the boy down enough that he enters the next natural step for the Manites, a chrysalis that helps their powers fully develop, though it's up in the air what that will result in. Father and son are barely holding their own against their mysterious foe, so Scott uses his report to contact Jean, which is Death's cue to disappear. Somehow he managed to use a psychic connection between Phoenix and her hubby to locate them and just vanishes. Now, much of this is presumed by the X-Men, but you could say they're drawing a logical conclusion to a certain extent. Next time they face him, they'll have to alter their strategies, since he seemed to know their skills pretty well. They hop on board the Blackbird, which is working now, I guess, and they take off to the rest of the team. Along for the ride, not having bought a ticket, is Death.
He could have found a way inside the plane, but the in-flight movie was going to be X-Men Origins Wolverine, and he'd rather risk falling off a plane at high speed 6 miles in the air.
The final issue's cover features Death grasping some fabric with an X symbol on it. I'm not entirely sure what that's supposed to belong to, though, and he's surrounded by the still costumed skeletons of 3 X-Men, with another skeleton reflected in his blade.
Oh, come on, that skeleton is naked. This isn't that kind of show, you pervs.
Everyone's gathered around Darko's cocoon like it's a drum circle, recapping previous events and waiting on the 3 absent X-Men. And there's the Blackbird, heading for the ground and hemorrhaging a trail of smoke.
Who didn't put their tray in the upright position? We have these rules for a reason, people!
Turns out Cable and Archangel are battling Death on the plane. It's kind of surprising, since you'd think a guy that was previously eluding them so easily up to now would have gone unnoticed until they landed, but this issue surprises you by having him be discovered. off-panel and not really explained how. Not exactly sure when they were supposed to have discovered he was on the plane, but it would have made sense to, fly somewhere else other than where he wants you to take him. Anyway, after Scott and Warren somehow have a quick chat about landing that they shouldn't be able to have, one outside the plane while it's traveling at high speed, no indication of comm devices, Cable gets knocked off, which horrifies Jean because, as narration notes, she can't help him, leaving it to Worthington to get his rescue on.
This just doesn't make sense to me. How many times have I read in an X-Men comic that Jean was considered not only a very powerful telepath, but probably the best telekinetic force on the planet? What exactly is keeping her from keeping her son from becoming a pavement pancake? It feels more like they wanted to briefly dabble in some maternal agony, but in order to do that, they have to basically ignore Jean's development from the past several years.
Death is about to skewer Scott, but he didn't count on Phoenix psychically telling him to optic blast the roof of the plane. She then asks X-Man for help. The plane can't be saved even with their combined telekinetic powers. I'm guessing that's either an error that slipped past the editors, or Jean had a brief flashback to a time when she was a spokeswoman for Doublemint Gum. Anyways, they have to slow the descent of the craft while Scott goes limp. Somehow, Death blocks Jean's psi link with Scott, and she senses something familiar yet horrible about him. The bird crashes, Nate shielding everyone from the debris, and Jean nabbing Scott. A short time later, they're investigating the crash, specifically what looks like Death's cloak. Psyche wants to leave before the police arrive to take the Manites into custody, and figures no one could have survived, and because sons just have to contradict their fathers, Cable mentions that a Horseman of Apocalypse would have been just fine, even though according to editor Mark Powers, Pocky is deader than a cold doornail. I promise.
Because if he died in the comic book, you know it's gonna stick.
And I kind of find it funny that this word bubble that no one could have possibly survived that crash is right next to a guy with a healing factor, who probably could have. Not to mention, the southern woman with super strength, or the Russian that can turn into metal. Nate Gray is a bit set off at the mention of En Sabah Nur, what with living in a reality where he ruled the planet. Nina joins in, saying that she and her siblings can sense that Death is still around. A ponderous claim, since 3 resident telepaths can't sense the villain, but Jean thinks there are some things about the Manites that remain unknown, even to themselves. They might even be able to pose some kind of threat to someone as powerful as Apocalypse. Wolvie finds himself a souvenir, Death's blade, but just then the telepaths are all psychically attacked, and Logan is pulled beneath the rubble as Death rises again. Wolverine! Is no more. So, I guess that wasn't his cloak we were looking at earlier?
One of the problems with the art in this miniseries is that while the characters are drawn very well for the most part, sometimes environmental details are bland and indistinct, or given very, very little panel focus. It feels like the panels are all congested and cluttered, but we get very little detail as to the surroundings these characters are supposed to be in.
Jean repeats that Death is after the children, like we don't already know that, but Scott is done running and prepared to fight. X-Man is all for that, but his older counterpart warns him of the folly of attacking while blinded by anger, even if their foe works for Apocalypse. Cyclops goes full force with his optic blast, not letting up, but it doesn't work. Not even Death's clothes are damaged as he knocks one eye aside.
A force that can destroy mountains is nothing compared to a cloak and some funky tribal armor. Such is the power of mighty Apocalypse!
After Archangel is thrown down with an illusion that the Master has plans for him later, Jean, who has again been described as one of the more powerful psionic talents on Earth, says she can't hope to stand up to Death, but can buy time for Nate and Cable to stand a chance, so she unleashes a neat-looking telekinetic groundswell, then fall down go boom.
The Phoenix unleashing her telekinetic fury on a Horseman of Apocalypse doesn't feel as epic as I think it should. I don't know if it's because of the congested feeling I mentioned earlier, something that's present throughout the series, or maybe that for all the talk of how dangerous Death is, he doesn't feel like that huge a threat when he just knocks people out most of the time. And maybe it's also because immediately after she attacks, Jean Dunn gets the Vapors and is at the enemy's mercy. And that only has to happen because the story needs to move along.
Jean wants to know who her executioner is, sensing familiarity in his eyes.
Now that you mention it, he does look a lot like a Jawa on steroids. It's almost like the comic predicted that both Star Wars and Marvel would one day be owned by the same company.
But after his moment's hesitation, Death turns from her and approaches Nate, Cable, and the kids. And that's when Wolverine returns from nowhere, going full berserker and giving his team time to get the Manites to safety. Though, if you look closely at his face, his upper lip is drawn really hilariously weird, almost like it was a caricature gag from Teen Titans. A lot of red cloth gets snagged in his claws until Death strikes him down. It's not overly graphic. We get a close-up of the blade with some of Wolfie's suit in tatters, then him grasping his gut. I thought maybe he was run through by the blade, but there doesn't seem to be any damage to the back of his suit, or blood on the blade itself, though it does all of a sudden have a black aura around it, so I don't know what that means. Jean races to him, sensing no brainwave activity, and decides Death himself is going to die. But he easily blocks her mental attack with his blade, because why should things make sense? It's at this moment that Nina informs everyone that Darko has completed his change, though we don't see him, and he has a plan, one that requires the psionic X-Men's help. Together they create a big lens flare or something. Then Death decides the Manites are worthy to survive and then pieces out.
Honestly, I don't know what I'm supposed to be looking at on that panel. 3 powerful psychics and a bunch of kids with immense untapped potential create a mundane-looking sunset, and that's evidence enough for this horseman to say they're worth surviving for now? It just yada-yada's the threat this guy posed, but that's not all the yada-yada, because we've still got one more page.
Nina figures that now Darko can take care of the Manites, as the rest of them go through their own changes. She thanks them for the X-Men's help and leaves with her siblings without even a "sorry your hairy Canadian died." She's one "okay, I love you, bye-bye" from being Mindy from Animaniacs. Not that the last 2 panels are much better. It seems unbelievable that Logan would die, given his healing factor, but die he did, so that the children would live, and Apocalypse will answer for their loss. The X-Men know that now their lives will never be the same.
Who will be the spotlight in our merchandising now? So that was Astonishing X-Men numbers 1 through 3. And wow, did it need some serious patchwork.
The pacing can be shaky, kind of all over the place at times. Background elements are prone to being indistinct and vague, with no impression on the reader. It tells when it should show sometimes, leaving some sequences kind of confusing, like when Nate is knocked back, Jean acts like he's unconscious, then he's back up again. And too often, it crams things into every panel instead of giving some moments the space they need. There's very little breathing room in moments like Jean attacking with everything she's got, and most of the fights in general. They don't really seem that exciting. And the character death they advertised at the end of issue 2, and probably the most popular X-Man ever, doesn't feel like it has any gravity to it. It didn't feel weighty when I first read it years ago, either. Perhaps part of it is the scene where he gets attacked and Jean seems to instantly know the wound is fatal, somehow. I'm not sure how she could, since she knows he's got a healing factor. A devastating reaction would have made more sense after Logan failed to get up, and she couldn't sense any brainwaves.
It certainly didn't help that much of the fighting seemed pretty dull. I get they can only do so much with still images, but I've seen comics before and after this that have featured better fights without having to explain or excuse things through dialogue. The visuals never really convinced me this was someone that countered the X-Men so easily because he knew their moves oh so well.
It reads like a 4-part story stretched out to 6 or 7 and then squeezed all into 3 issues, if that makes any sense. Not to mention that normally powerful characters give their all, and it doesn't do anything against this one guy because he's a horseman. I know they get powered up and everything, but this feels like it was just some unsuccessful dramatic tension. He seems to just materialize new powers as he needs them to beat the X-Men but not actually live up to his name. Though Jean talking down Darko was a good mentor moment for her, making the changing, much like mutancy itself, analogous to puberty as she tells him he's got nothing to fear from his biology. So, one nice moment. Way to go.
And at the end of the day, there's still an evil cyborg head just lying around in a New Mexico desert. Guess the writers just plain forgot about old Bastion. But this review isn't quite over yet, as there are more revelations to be had next week. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues. Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, taking issue with the first death of Wolverine. Last week, we saw the newest Horseman of Death fight the X-Men over the fate of the powerful Manites. When the dust settled and Death decided the kids were all right to survive, Wolverine was left dead. Yes, even though the lack of adamantium left his healing factor much more powerful. Yes, even though there didn't seem to be anything particularly special about the weapon that killed him. Let's continue with Uncanny X-Men number 375 and see if a good old-fashioned home autopsy illuminates things for us.
Written by Terry Cavanaugh, Alan Davis, and Adam Kubert, with art by Tim Townsend, Bat, Chris Sotomayor, and Liquid, the cover of this anniversary issue features Professor X about to perform an autopsy on Wolverine. It's a good tone-setting visual that is also very subdued in a way. Though I remember when this issue was being advertised before its release, and they basically used this image with pixel censoring over Logan's face. But not his claws, so it looked kind of like this. Maybe a bit more pixelated, but still not exactly keeping the spoiler in check.
Maybe Marvel's marketing department thought that was enough to throw people off. What with there being dozens of X-Men characters that have 3 claws protruding from the back of their hands. Oy.
We begin with a credits page that also delves into Xavier's mission to help mutant kind, mentioning how the X-Men took off because it seemed like Chuck was cracking under the pressure, and finally the events leading up to Wooey's demise. The story itself begins with Rogue, Kitty Pryde, and Nightcrawler in a penthouse, reflecting on their recent trials, helping Mystique, the recent erratic behavior of Lorna Dane, aka Polaris, possibly due to her boyfriend Alex Summers' death, and the diaries left behind by Rogue's foster mother, Destiny, warning of a global cataclysm. And that's when they get the call.
Yep, we're all here. What? No! That's not Absolutely, we're on our way!
That wasn't the call about Logan. It was a local sandwich shop saying their order was ready, but they don't deliver.
Colossus gets the news while on the road with Marrow and his brother, an unconscious Mikhail Rasputin, who was recently freed of a malevolent influence. Good thing they were headed to the X-Mansion anyway. Xavier has just finished a mind probe of the members of X-Force, necessary though unpleasant because they're kind of a weak link in the chain of X-Men affiliates. X-Force's fierce independence makes you vulnerable to infiltration.
Now, Professor, I can explain our newest recruit. We thought the stray dog was a mutant because its bark sounded a lot like I love cake. If that's not a mutant power, I don't know what is. After all, why else would we post it on our YouTube channel dedicated to human-mutant relations?
Before he takes off to evaluate Generation X, which seems to include messing with Emma Frost's head, Storm says they have to return to the school. What follows is a 2-page spread of the X-Men and Moira McTaggart standing around the body of their fallen comrade. Some are clearly somber, upset, devastated, Rogue looking away, possibly in denial, though not all their expressions are perfect. Kurt almost looks bored and puzzled, and Gambit hardly looks affected at all. I don't know why Jean is a brunette all of a sudden, or, for that matter, why Wolverine's costume is almost completely shredded off. It was mostly intact when he died.
I mean, they lost the Blackbird, so I imagine they had to walk and or hitchhike the way back to the mansion, so maybe they took turns carrying him and had a few slip-ups along the way.
Cyclops sums up for the professor the events leading up to their teammates' inexplicable demise, looking like a kinda neat movie poster, all things considered. And maybe that childhood head injury Scott suffered, the one that keeps him from controlling his powers, is having some lasting effects, because that is not the sword Death used. I bet Sigmund Freud would have a time analyzing that alteration. Anyway, Beast will help Moira with the autopsy, since it's the least he can do for his hairy buddy, so it's a good thing Mikhail's condition is stabilized. Though McTaggart wants to run some tests on Marrow, since she was changed by Skrull technology on a previous mission.
For those unaware, Marrow initially looked something like this. But after some time travel and a little time spent on the Skrull homeworld, she looks more conventionally attractive because this is comics. Though, on the plus side, it'll be much easier for her to cosplay as Mina Ashido from My Hero Academia.
Kitty is still in disbelief that her mentor's healing factor failed him, and that she wasn't at his side. Rogue says they probably wouldn't have been able to do much of a difference against Death, and can only bring him to justice. There are other allies that need to be informed of this loss, but Warren is more concerned about his girlfriend, Psylocke, making sure she's safe if mutants are being targeted. As Charles instructs everyone to head to the command center so the doctors can work, Archangel takes off. Literally, it looks like he's lifting off the ground here. Anyway, even though Betsy Braddock is still a formidable opponent even after losing her psionic powers, he's still too anxious to sit around and do nothing. Later, Scott has explained the story twice to Xavier, only for their words to become more heated. A sudden brownout doesn't help, the reaction that they may be under attack showing Chuck that Psyche has been lacking in discipline, and even accuses him of being under someone's control. Scott lashes back that his teacher's ways haven't created the world that he wanted, and it's making him unhinged, especially after the UN gave Genosha over to Magneto. Scott splits attendance into two groups: Team blindly believe the dream even though Xavier's gone nuts, and Team independent thinkers that agree with Cyclops and therefore must think he's oh so cool. Just as Nightcrawler tries cooling tempers down, Xavier goes all Phoenix right and accuses Phoenix of psychically manipulating Scott's mind.
She's his wife. She doesn't need telepathy to tell him what to do. Being a saucy redhead doesn't hurt either.
Charles attacks, though I'm not entirely sure how. He's not a telekinetic, and yet we see Jean hovering in a field of psionic energy. So I guess that's part of her reeling in pain or something? I don't know. Whatever's going on, Scott can tell it's ripping her apart and goes on the offensive, firing an optic blast at the prof, but he's narrowly saved by Shadowcat's phasing ability. But that beam has to go somewhere, and that somewhere is right in Storm's torso, knocking her against the wall. Charles then attacks One Eye, but then incurs Jean's fury in retaliation. Cable fires back, thinking Xavier was only defending himself, but then gets told the obvious that husband and wife are obliged to defend each other by his own alternate reality self. So it's extra weird. As the infighting escalates, Jean takes Scott and the 4 X-Men that seem to agree with them to retreat, only for the walls to collapse, separating the team.
This is exactly why I don't go to group therapy. Well, that and I was asked to leave. You punch one fellow patient and suddenly you're unstable. You know what's unstable? Wearing those t-shirts with the tuxedo designs with open-toed shoes. That's unstable, Steve!
The pro-Xavier group need to get the Prof and Storm some medical attention, but they take time to wonder whom of the other half they can blame for all this. Is Phoenix controlling people, or is X-Man the unknown element? Gambit has made a deal with Sinister in his ongoing title, and Marrow could have been changed by the Skrull tech, or Rogue might have been coerced by Mystique. Cable goes to scout for a way to get their wounded treated, while there are equal but opposite speculations from Team Psych, Scott himself apparently having been mind-wiped. Either Xavier was broken by Bastion or is regressing back into Onslaught, the malevolent manifestation of a minor mind merge with Magneto. Nate thinks Cable could be controlling the Professor, possibly after losing his fight with the techno-organic virus. Kitty could have been manipulated by the Skrulls, and Kurt has been acting a little weird recently. And hey, what about that time Colossus defected to Magneto's acolytes? Heck, even his brother Mikhail, who's in a coma, gets accused of being the mastermind.
You get accused of treachery. You get accused of treachery. Everyone's getting accused of treachery!
X-Man decides to go it alone to find the problem at its source, mentioning that Archangel was either in the know or awfully lucky to have left before all the chaos started. The rich boy, however, is still on his way to see Betsy as a storm approaches. He muses to himself how new it still feels to have his old feathery wings back, even after all these months, then is distracted by an object that's been tailing him for about 10 minutes. It's maintained its distance and elevation from him, so it's not likely a coincidence. So he starts zipping around in a pattern and at a speed that nothing man-made should be able to follow. He gets a better look at it as it passes overhead, noticing it's large enough to have a crew but doesn't seem to have any markings or portholes, and it happens to be heading right for his family estate. He makes a leap in logic that the pilot extrapolated his intended destination, which feels a bit convenient.
Maybe they thought you were headed to a coffee shop that's coincidentally in the same direction. Maybe you're being paranoid and there are aliens that are off to abduct one of your neighbors. It's not always about you, dude.
Back at the X-Men's base, Gambit almost has a tender moment with Rogue until Cable plays third wheel by exploding onto the scene. Literally. Jean pleads for him to reconsider, but he's not taking any chances, given what the Phoenix has been capable of before, and opens fire on his own mother. Marrow slashes at him, only to be dealt a fatal blow. In between panels, which is kind of awkward. Seriously, we see Cable bragging about his scimitar's significance. Rogue reacts, Marrow's dead. That's actually worse than what Wolvie got. Rogue avenges the young woman, but her attack backfires, accidentally detonating a grenade on Cable's belt. On the other side of the debris, Charles and Aurora are too weak to be phased or teleported, and only getting worse as Nate Gray crashes in. His first attack on Xavier is taken by Piotr, leading Kurt to counterattack so Kitty can get away, but he's fatally attacked, apparently disintegrated. Nate chides them for not heeding his warning about how dangerous Professor X was, as Colossus, on fire, charges from behind and, using his last moments of life, impales young Gray on some pointy debris. Meanwhile, Worthington has followed the saucer to his home, with rocket-packed goons exiting the craft to attack. Fortunately, they're not well armored, so they go down in one flyby, one hit each. But he's immediately grounded by the unexpected arrival of himself.
Marvel Comics, the House of Ideas. Most of which are about clones and evil duplicates.
Remy cradles Rogue, begging her to hold on and professing his love. She says she loved the moments they've shared, but it was never going to work between them and he should move on, and she passes away.
You know, I believe in things like forgiveness and catching the perpetrator of a crime and having them face justice instead of executing them on the spot. But the mastermind of this attack caused the death of the hottest member of the X-Men, and for that they must die!
Likewise, Kitty Pryde is the only survivor on her side. Xavier and Storm have died from their injuries, and she kisses Peter goodbye as he shuffles off this mortal coil. Then, from Charles's corpse, arises the mastermind of all this death, Onslaught. And Remy LeBeau meets the manipulator of all the discourse, Dark Phoenix. Wait, what?
Two villainous entities targeting the same heroes at the same time in the same way? This is just really, really inconsiderate. You people need to learn to coordinate.
Everyone wakes up intact and not dead in the command room to Xavier's apologies for the psychodrama he orchestrated, though with some help from Cable, Jean, and even X-Man. This wasn't because his TV went out and he got bored, but because he'd discovered the team had been infiltrated. From Charles's erratic behavior that led to the dissolution of the X-Men to their recent pre-fight disagreements were all an act in order to verify that the team loners were who they appeared to be. Storm, Jean, and Scott were easy to confirm, and he called Nate and Cable to help with the tests, but when Wolverine died, Chuck had to speed things up. He constructed a scenario bringing each X-Men's deepest loyalties to the fore, authenticating all of them, though the question remains, who's the mole?
Maybe part of this story was born from a writer's idea to just get all the fake-out and retcon deaths out of the way for these characters all in one go. But hey, at least no one actually killed Rogue. But technically, Xavier thought about it, so I'll just cut him up a little. Or break his legs. What, it's not like he's using them or anything.
Warren is having his tail feathers handed to him by his copy, but fortunately his girlfriend is a trained ninja and saves his butt. They make an escape just as we return to the Institute, where Beast and Moira have determined that even though the guy in the slab appears to be Wolverine on a physical level as well as molecular, his DNA lacks the X-Factor gene. It's a more superficial replication of Knucklehead genetic code, which, after the use of a counteracting compound concocted by McCoy, the body reverts to its natural state. A Skrull.
Thus explaining not only why Logan never healed, but why he got surprised by Cable. Maybe why he stuck by Jean and Scott after the team parted ways. Maybe even explaining why he would bother asking Cyclops permission for anything. He managed to fool everyone from closest friends to the most powerful telepaths for weeks. But there's a darker twist to this revelation. The Skrulls have managed to almost perfectly replicate Canadians. William Shatner, Colin Mockery, the Bare Naked Ladies, none of them can be trusted!
Charles explains that weeks ago, when they'd returned from a time travel mission that brought them back a bit before they'd left, an electromagnetic pulse from Magneto struck their vessel and seemed to activate the ship's hibernation systems, leaving them all unconscious. Xavier could sense that a malevolent force was at work, but couldn't make sense of it at the time. It's likely that Wolvie was chosen because any other X-Man would require Skrull tech to replicate their powers, and a Logan duplicate would just have to avoid danger in lieu of a healing factor. Though the Skrull homeworld was gobbled by Galactus before the X-Men returned, there's no way to know what their plans currently are.
Perhaps they're planning an invasion of some kind. One they wouldn't tell anyone about. A secret invasion, if you will. That sounds ridiculous.
Warren and Betsy take time to make out and explain that Warren's hair confirmed he was the real deal as they head back to the mansion. There, the team awaits the arrival of X-Force and the rest of Generation X, as Sean Cassidy and a panicked Jubilee walk in, wanting to know if the news of their fallen comrade is true. Shadowcat almost spoils everything, but Charles and the other telepaths take them to another room to discuss the matter.
You know, it might be quicker and overall better to just wait for the other teams to arrive, along with Archangel and Psylocke, and only do one more round of mental trauma theater to verify their identities. Otherwise, it's going to look like Charles is actually enjoying this.
Pride has been narrating this entire issue, but the captions are the type usually indicative of dialogue carried over from a different page or scene, which is kind of weird. Anyway, on the final splash page, she notes that what was said and done can't be reversed, and they still don't know where the real Wolverine is.
This was not a bad issue for an anniversary event, especially since it seems more about the significance of the number 375 rather than the years of publication. Xavier's reasoning made sense, but it kind of pushed the limits of decency, and you see why there are some readers ready to accept the Professor Xavier is a jerk mindset. The art had a couple errors, but was overall consistently good, and I thought this fallout from Wolverine's death was actually done better than the death itself. Next up, we have X-Men number 95.
Story by Alan Davis with art by Tom Rain, Scott Hanna, and Marie Javins. The cover features most of the team reeling back as Death rips open his cloak, as this issue features Death Revealed.
He has problem skin!
Beast, Moira, and Charles are analyzing the details of the dead alien subterfuge, though I'm not sure why it has a hole in its chest. possibly as part of the autopsy, but could be artists depicting the wound that killed him, which would be inaccurate compared to Astonishing X-Men. But the fact remains, Wolvie could have been taken anywhere in the universe.
Probably to put him on one of their super teams so Marvel can feature him in yet another book.
On a 2-page spread, Wolverine, rather a Skrull taking on his classic gold and brown look, is fighting off a gang of his brethren, as narration notes the race's pride in their heritage as warriors and conquerors. They consider meeting their goals through subterfuge more honorable than direct combat, but hey, they're not too shabby at fighting. A commander is impressed with how efficient a killer the X-Man is, and is informed that simulating his physical form was easy. Programming a match for his psychology was another thing. An ally to the shapeshifters provided them with a complete record of Logan's psyche, taken from the real deal himself, all the better to fool the genetic tests and psi probes. Unfortunately, the Skrulls that have posed as Wolverine have been acting a lot like him, insubordinate, as if they really were him, though that's easily fixed, according to the specialist. Bonus, this current spy got the healing factor upgrade. Just not a very good one, considering he's dead with one shot of the commander's weapon. After their first operative's demise, their next Wolvie needs to be in perfect order so as to pass the X-Men's scrutiny. It turns out they had a bunch of specialized war scrolls, soldiers who could copy their subjects' powers as well as appearance, with the intention of causing some chaotic shenanigans within the Shi'ar Empire. But the X-Men's interference in the past resulted in the loss of the genetic strain. Efforts to resequence it have resulted in a number of mutated Skrulls we see here kept inside a single pen.
Hey, could we get a couple magazines? Or a toilet? No? Yeah. Okay, I just figured we'd save the janitor the trouble is all.
One captive Skrull, Fizz, has heard some stories, specifically how the Xavier and his X-Men, their supposed enemies, led the fight against Galactus, and he's trying to understand why the people they're trying to infiltrate would try to save their planet, yet the Skrulls' mysterious ally, allegedly so powerful, did nothing to help. His buddy Jack doesn't want to hear this talk. He's content to buy into the propaganda rather than the crazy talk of a better life. At the mansion, Storm convinces Xavier that exhausting themselves trying to look for Logan is not the answer. It's sad that he's gone, but he's a single piece of a larger puzzle, when there's a wider pattern to be found. After a Danger Room session, Kurt brings up the subject of Polaris with Scott and Jean. She feared she was being followed, but with no evidence to back it up, it was disregarded as a delayed reaction to Havoc's death, something his older brother Scott is still finding hard to believe. With the recent developments, however, there may be more to Lorna's paranoia. After all, a bunch of Skrulls are holding a board meeting to discuss getting a device to counter her magnetic powers. Coincidence? Their ally selected her as one of the 12 and must be secured. Surveillance footage sees her welcome 3 of the X-Men implicitly until they leave. Cleverly thinking ahead, they figure there might be a secret password to confirm identities amongst the X-Men, so they have another disguise she won't question.
Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson? The Domino's delivery guy? Oprah?
Lorna is quietly reading when there's a knock at the door. It turns out to be her thought-dead boyfriend, Alex Summers. In trying to convince her, he gets close enough to slap a power-dampening collar on her. Polaris mentions that the magnetic field of Alex's body was all wrong just before passing out, which gives the Skrulls something to update in their database. Orders insist this agent complete his task and wipe the woman's short-term memory, but since she's one of a dozen people their ally wants, he takes the initiative by taking her. In Egypt, a Skrull tells a high priest that they've acquired an artifact, one which will enable them to restore the occupant of the imposing sarcophagus. Then it's back to the commander who abducted Lorna, returning to base and threatening nearby underlings with ultimate punishment if they start gabbing about taking one of the 12. I'm guessing by ultimate punishment he means they'll either be one more dayed or new 52'd. He passes by yet another Wolvie copy, something which Lorna is conscious enough to notice as well. The portly Skrull that led the business meeting earlier isn't too happy with this abrupt development, feeling this could have dire consequences. When a cloaking device is detected, that's Lorna's cue to reveal that she'd been playing possum and uses her optic blasts.
Oh, sweet mercy, please tell me they did not give Lorna Dane the Harper Row treatment and just hand her a bunch of the other X-Men's powers on top of her own.
Nah, Cyclops was just using an image inducer, and since the collar was specifically designed with Polaris's magnetic powers in mind, his abilities worked just dandy. It was a team effort unveiling their plan, between Lorna detecting their spy's magnetic field, Nightcrawler locating him, and Phoenix probing their commander's thoughts, as he posed as Havoc. Just as it's declared Psyche is another of the 12, and is then to be taken alive, the rest of the team bust in, and you can almost hear the 90s cartoon theme song. Scott demands to know where Wolverine is, but the Skrull in charge doesn't know, something Jean can confirm. One of the shapeshifters suggests attacking her, but she's also one of the 12. Really hard to fight your enemies when you can't, fight them. Shadowcat sneaks up on the bickering pair, knocking one with a boot of her boot. Is that a sound effect or just labeling the obvious? Anyway, the Skrull fluent Pride asks about the 12, doing her best to take after Wolvie and promise things will only get more painful the longer she goes without an answer.
This is the result when a young woman is both mentored by Wolverine and, coincidentally, spent the last 2 weeks binging 24.
Young Catherine is not on the list of untouchables, so she's fair game, but Colossus steps in to throw her attacker aside. But his dialogue is just odd here. He tells the foe that Kitty was solid when she was struck. Well, obviously, how else is he going to attack her? And how well he knows her and she was not bluffing about her threats. It's just, we got that she meant what she was saying. We don't need Peter to tell us this. She was doing just fine on her own. Well, that tossed Skrull creates an opening for the deformed Skrulls to join the fight, but Fizz is still intent on finding a better way. Death teleports in and sneaks past the fray, taking out a Skrull to take his space briefcase. He places a bomb near a primary power conduit, something Marrow is apparently savvy enough to know because that's what she says as she lunges for an attack. He smacks her away, managing to avoid harm from her skeleton armor, and she figures that they must have fought before. It's confirmed for those that haven't met him yet that this is the guy that killed the fake Logan, and Jean advises everyone to not hold back, as only all their power will take him down. "Sorry, darling, but all that and more won't even come close."
Gee, I wonder who this Horseman of Death could be. I bet the revelation will be super surprising.
The bomb detonates, causing a chain reaction throughout the base, but the X-Men and some Skrulls are saved by the combined efforts of Storm and Phoenix. Death apparently lost track of that case he came for, and when he finds it, Colossus punches him to the ground. But he gets up as if it didn't really affect him. And remember just how powerful Colossus is supposed to be. He's fought Thor.
Peter shattered his mask. We can see Death's face.
How can you shatter fabric? It's fabric! And why are you declaring that you can see his face when you're in the process of seeing his face?
Yeah, his dialogue speaking to Marrow and Jean kind of gave it away. But now he's speaking with a bit more eloquence as he declares Wolverine is no more and Apocalypse is his master, yada 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 yada. So he teleports away, and Storm reminds the team that there are some other explosions that haven't exploded, and they need to run away from those. As they catch their breath just outside the smoldering remains of the Skrull base, most of them are certain it's the real Logan this time, and Kitty noting how this was foretold in Destiny's diaries. And with Apocalypse back in the picture, life itself may well be at stake.
Ending that issue. I enjoyed the art, can't say I found much wrong with it, and it was a solid progression of the story, but they definitely stumbled with some of that dialogue.
Not just with characters declaring the obvious, but Death speaking more like Wolverine, which is kind of a dead giveaway to their big surprise. Whenever he did speak beforehand, rare as it was always more a proper manner, no contractions or apostrophes, something he reverts back to when his identity is revealed. It would have been better not to have him speak at all, or at least in fewer words that were consistent in Death's mannerisms, not Logan's. And what, is his knife, like, phasing through this guy now? What? Oh, I don't even know anymore.
We aren't quite finished yet, though. Next week, we see the new Death take on a mission in the name of his evil master, and get details on how the old knucklehead landed this new career. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues. Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, taking issue with the first death of Wolverine. Last week, the Logan that fell in battle was revealed to be a Skrull spy, and when his shape-shifting brethren targeted Lorna Dane, the X-Men launched a surprise attack, only to get a surprise for themselves, revealing that the Horseman of Death was actually Wolverine. But they only noticed this when his mask came off, not when he started speaking exactly like Logan. Jeez, if that got past the X-Men, maybe that Skrull dude didn't really need to work that hard to fool him.
The cover makes note of the character's 25th year, and how he's still the best at what he does, which seems to be snarling at the reader with his foiled claws already snicked. We begin weeks earlier, as the X-Men have just returned from the past to the present-ish. Again, they came back a little earlier than they'd left and figured they can prevent some bad stuff from happening, like the UN handing Genosha over to Magneto. But they're rendered unconscious by a Skrull ship, and one of the boarding party takes Wolverine's place, which I guess in this case has to be permanent, and he's thoroughly knocked out so he can wake up with the other mutants. A 2-page spread summarizes how seamlessly the fake passed himself off as Logan, to both his friends and enemies, all the while subtly discrediting Xavier until the X-Men were torn apart, before his demise at the hands of the real, but brainwashed Wolvie. The X-Men are gathered together, still reeling from these events. They couldn't have planned for a big switcheroo that resulted in one of their own becoming a new Horseman. The most they can do is approximate just when their friend was taken, but they're still puzzled at how he became Death.
Obviously, Logan sent out his resume, got an interview, passed it, and went through orientation. Given that he's now a drone with murderous tendencies, I can say from experience his new job is most likely in retail.
A splash page features him in his new work clothes, narration giving a fatal spin on the classic line often associated with him. He's the best there is at what he does, and what he does is kill.
Yes, he's the best that failed to kill a group of children and most of the mutants in his way. Truly none can surpass him. Wait, are we sure Apocalypse remade him and not James Tynion IV?
He's summoned by his master, whom for now I shall call Zippy McFez, who tells him to look upon the image of his next victim. Yet in the panel it looks like Death is too embarrassed and just turns away. The Hulk is considered a blemish to their greater cause, so must be destroyed. And Death takes off, sword already out for a dramatic exit, I suppose. We jump back to the recent past, where Wolvie is waking up just as Skrulls are leaving him with his soon-to-be new boss, whom he recognizes by sense alone. Logan's all ready to fight, but Zippy is more concerned with his destiny, the moment which the Knucklehead's life of suffering has culminated to, and the greatest challenge to determine his future.
It's not a BuzzFeed quiz, is it?
Look, it's really important to know which character from the Big Bang Theory you are.
You really are the ultimate evil.
While riding a armored robot raptor thing, Death is following a path of destruction left by this jolly green fellow here, having a casual walk through the forest. Or casual for him, rather. Narration mentions that Bruce Banner had some control over his monstrous form until recently, leaving Hulk going on primal instinct, with just enough wherewithal to know he's being followed. Death-Vorine attacks just as we're sent back to the past, where his thoughts constantly go back to the state of the X-Men. Skrulls come to collect him for his challenge, sending him to an arena where Zippy welcomes him. Your destiny awaits.
Well, I wish it would get on the stick, bub. There's a nature program I'm hoping to catch on the Learning Channel.
They recorded me hunting and feeding on a gazelle, and I want to know if they got my good side.
Sabretooth attacks, whom narration notes has powers and ferocity much like Wolverine's, but now has adamantium-laced bones. After Vic draws first blood, Logan figures that one wrong move and he's done for, even though his own healing factor is accelerated without that metal. His inner monologue suggests that because Creed has adamantium, that makes it easier for him to kill Logan, but if you ask me, that seems pretty contradictory. In the present, Hulk wants to know why he's being attacked, and Death responds that he doesn't fit into the Master's new order as he stabs the brute in the back. But no one orders Hulk.
Unless it Hulk's intern ordering him half-calf mochaccino with cinnamon and whipped cream. You think Hulk mad now? You not see Hulk before his coffee and biscotti.
Hulk had his chance as the Horseman of War, but muffed it, which is a weird bit of dialogue coming from Wolverine, brainwashed or not. And since the world to come has no place for the weak, Death takes his sword from its fleshy green sheath and continues his assassination attempt. But Hulk is smart enough to use his enemy's blade to pull him in closer, making his classic declaration of being the strongest one there is. We return to Wolvie's fight with Creed, which the latter says is more about than who wins the day, but who rides as Apocalypse's new horseman.
Looks like this match just went into sudden death.
The title is more suited to Sabretooth, but that's pretty much what makes Wolverine snap, as he delivers a defiant and decisive strike, his claws ripping right into his enemy's midsection. Adamantium bones don't do much to protect your guts. While he'd previously stopped short of punching Victor's ticket, Logan now gouges him over and over. For Creed, becoming Death would be like a non-stop party, but instead of awesome snacks, it's blood. Instead of the best DJ, it's blood. And instead of drunk guys with lampshades on their heads, it's blood. But the Knucklehead is confident that he'll have a better chance of fighting any kind of programming involved, and eventually win, reasoning that better men than Fezhead have tried and failed.
How do you mean better, exactly? Because we're talking about a nigh-immortal tyrant that's been trying to conquer and manipulate the planet for centuries. Technologically better? I sincerely doubt that. Morally better? Possibly, but that would mean going into some serious relativity.
Aw, look, Hulk's forgiven Death and is giving him a great big loving bear hug, and oh no, that's my mistake. No, he's trying to crush him to death horribly. It won't be a pretty sight. But after a headbutt, the giant is phased enough to release his foe and recognizes Fancy Man as his old sparring partner, Little Man. Recalling all their past encounters, Hulk grabs a tree and slams it down with such force that it results in a mushroom cloud.
And that is just plain awesome. Don't get me wrong, I dig me some Wolverine, but he's gotten so oversaturated over the years, it is kind of nice to see someone overpower him like that.
Sabretooth is strung up by the ceiling, parallel to Wolverine, both of them largely naked just to make this all extra awkward, I'm sure, while Zippy begins the long and torturous process of removing the adamantium from Victor's bones and implanting it within Logan. On the very next page, Death is lunging from what looks like the ground, newly remetaled claws unsheathed. It kind of implies that he was driven into the dirt, though you'd think the tree would have flattened his flesh and organs, and on the next page it looks like he's lying in a crater, so I'm not sure what to think of this. After being punctured by those claws, Hulk goes into a rage and decides to smash Little Man until he stops doing that. He slams him into a tree, but Death manages to get in a few good cuts, disorienting Hulk long enough to get in a final fatal attack. Strangely enough, the narration boxes and font change, fitting more Logan's inner monologue around this time in his title, but it continues as third-person narration as before. It describes how Logan's more heroic nature asserts itself, making the Horseman hesitate just long enough for Hulk to throw him down. He just wants to be left alone and is tired of fighting Little Man, and seems satisfied enough that he's shown him what for. After he leaves, Death is taken by a beam of light.
First he gets wrecked by the Hulk, and now he's going to get probed by aliens. This is just not Death's day.
No, he's just been returned to Apocalypse, who's shed his human disguise and decided that his new minion could fight the Green Behemoth for eternity before an actual victor ever arose. In any case, Hulk will likely die in the impending inferno that will overtake the world and usher in a new era.
My era. The Age of Apocalypse. And I'm totally the first one to think of that. Me and no one else. This is absolutely the first time anyone's ever used that title.
So concludes Wolverine number 145, and as a standalone issue, it's pretty good. The narration nicely enhancing the atmosphere, and the explanation of Logan's transformation was very well done, including how he gets his adamantium back. But, given the whole of the first death of the character, I gotta say it's not all quite as solid.
It's been a while since I read the comics that led up to this event, so I can't say for sure if this was planned for a while or not, but there are times where it feels like it was a rush job for an admittedly interesting idea that came up at the last minute. Given how hectic comics can be, it's entirely possible that someone had an idea the editors didn't like, so they threw together this one so it would clear things up and lead to a bigger cross-title story. Astonishing felt shakily paced, congested, and rushing in moments that could have been given a bit more time or weight, but the subsequent comics actually got better as they went along. Though the unnecessary inconsistency of Death's manner of speaking kind of ruined their big surprise. The littlest details can have the biggest impact on a story, and this is one of those examples where it does not turn in the story's favor.
Even in this one issue, he's inconsistent with his speech pattern, so I'm not entirely sure what to think, other than they should have just kept him speaking all prim and proper like while he was Death, before we found out it was Wolverine, and afterwards. It would have made the big reveal had even a little bit more impact.
Though I will grant there were some clever allusions, like Death dragging down fake Wolverine and emerging from the ground saying that he was no more, subtly talking about himself perhaps and not the Skrull. But the greatest killer, enhanced by Apocalypse, can't take down some kids or any of the X-Men that aren't on the list of the 12. Even setting aside the fact that a lot of his skills came from his gear, like a cloaking device and whatever the heck that sword was supposed to be, it seems like maybe becoming Death kinda hindered Logan's killing skills. And yet he still manages to be better at it than this stupid imitation.
Overall, I would say the story is okay. It gets better in the second half, but it still falters because they dropped the ball in some pretty key places. And on top of other stuff I've mentioned, maybe if they had waited a couple of months before revealing who Death was, it may have been more of a shock for the reader. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.